Reckless on ABC North Queensland. My name's Alex Chambers. It's 23 minutes to 11. And my next guest was described by Jonathan Thurston as better than Lego, which is a pretty interesting description. Dr. Jo Lukens is a psychologist with Peak Performance Psychology, and she's just finished her book called The Elite. Good morning, Dr. Lukens.
Good morning, Alex.
Better than Lego, huh?
Well, it would seem.
Did that surprise you when you saw that?
Oh, no, it didn't actually. We had a bit of a joke about that, so it was a nice compliment to have. Lego's pretty well valued in our household, so I took that as a compliment.
Oh, it is. Now, we speak to you a lot about many different issues, but sports is where your passion lies.
Yeah, that's certainly where my career began. I started off in my studies in psychology because I had an interest in sports psychology, so I've been really fortunate over the last 25 or so years to work within the domain of sport and work with a lot of great athletes and teams and coaches, and have really enjoyed that experience.
What has been some of the highlights for you?
Well, I think, there's some of the obvious ones in terms of, the Fire being so successful in terms of their
they've been
championships.
amazing,
They're a fantastic team, and seeing the highs and lows. I think one of the things that's a real privilege when you get to work behind the scenes with sporting teams is you get to see some of the things that you don't necessarily see at the public front. So you see some of the athletes' vulnerabilities and you get to work with athletes. And I think it's that satisfaction of working with athletes and hoping that in some way your work can make a bit of a difference in their lives.
And all of your experience over the past 25 years has really culminated in this book that you've just recently published and will be available soon. Tell us, it's called The Elite, but there's a few more subheadlines with that as well.
Yeah, so I guess the key message is that this is a book for everyone. So that's what I hope from it. So the idea is that you don't have to be an elite athlete to think like one. But one of the things that I've found in the years that I've been working with athletes is there's a few characteristics of athletes that really helps to make them successful. So an athlete will be successful for a whole range of reasons, and obviously their physical ability and their tactical skills and all of those sorts of things that we would instantly think of a part of an athlete's success. But we know that the mental side of sport is incredibly important, and there's a few observations that I've made over the years about some of those characteristics, and that's what I've tried to share in the book.
I was reading through it yesterday, and what I found quite interesting is that even though you use a lot of sporting stars as examples and things like that, a lot of the messages that you can take away that you can actually apply to any part of your life. It doesn't have to be sport.
No, absolutely not. And that was the intention, is that, there's many aspects of life that's a performance, if you like, so whether you are trying to excel in your academic studies, if you're trying to have your relationships work well, and of course there's things such as your sporting experiences as well, but there's no doubt that the principles of success are common across lots of different domains, and that's the message that I hope to get across too. It's certainly not a book that's just for athletes.
And what inspired you to finally put this all together in a book?
Yeah, well, it came about a few years ago. I have a position out at JCU, and I was speaking at a conference that they hosted up in Palm Cove and about the lessons I'd learnt from working with athletes, and at the time I thought that'd be a great idea for a book, and put some ideas together, and then I really had an opportunity last year that I thought I really need to put this into place as a project, and so did all the basic things that you would tell an athlete to do about setting goals and working out a bit of a plan about how to do it. So then I was able to, with the support of a mentor that I took on board as well, put the book together, and now it's finished. So I'm delighted to say it's finished.
How did you find that process? Because usually when people write books, they can take a couple of months off and do some time, but you're working the whole time through this process as well. How did you find that?
Yeah, the book journey has been a really interesting one, and what's been interesting for me is I've learnt a lot more about myself in writing the book that I probably really hadn't anticipated would be part of the journey. So I think it's some of those basic goal setting principles that you would set for any project, that I had to begin with the end in mind and think about what I wanted it to look like, what would be the time frame, and I think that was probably what's really spurred me to action, because the idea's been there for a long time, but I just hadn't followed through and got it done. So I had to prioritise it, and it's one of the messages in the book that when you choose to do well at one thing, you have to be able to understand that means saying no to other things. So I just had to work out my own priorities in relation to that. So I had to learn to say that little word. It's a simple word, but no to a few things. That was one of the things that helped me to get it done.
What I also find interesting in the opening pages of the book, you say why this book wouldn't be good for you and why this book would be good for you. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I think that it's important for people to reflect on what they're looking for, and certainly the feedback that I've had, because the book's now out, from a few people who've read it, is that's actually a section that they found really helpful, because not everyone will necessarily read a book from cover to cover. And so what I did in that first chapter is I guess, a little highlight about why I would read each of the different chapters and what you might gain from it. So that allows people to sort of cherry pick out of it what's a priority for them at a particular point in time and can be helpful for them in their reading and their goals. And then hopefully it's a resource they can return to over time to pick up skills. And there's lots of sort of handy tips and how-tos so to help people along the way.
This is what I found interesting because it's very easy to read. It's broken up in different chapters. And when you do that, it's sort of like you can read a little bit and then I think you really ponder the things you've read because you've made it interactive in a way. Because at the end of every chapter, you've got sort of little questions that once you've read it that you can ask yourself, or even little 24-hour challenges that you've got in there as well. Why did you decide to bring that element into it?
Well, because I think sometimes it's easy with a lot of the books that I've enjoyed reading. I've wanted a call to action, So you could certainly read it for some of the stories that are in it and simply read it and do nothing. That would be that, if that's what your goal is. But if you're actually looking to make some small subtle changes in your life, if there's an area in your life you're wanting to improve in, then hopefully there'll be a chapter there for you with, like you said, some handy hints. And the key message is you don't have to do a complete overhaul of your life. I would always say to people, start with something small because we know that mood is contagious, habits are contagious. So doing a few small things for yourself for improvement will help with your motivation. Put the things in place. You don't have to achieve it all overnight. And so those incremental chips away at improving ourselves and reaching our goals is something that you can attain.
And it gives you things to think about as well, and things you might not, that you might kind of instinctively know but might not think is the right way to do things. And I guess it just backs up that in a way as well.
Thanks, Alex. I was hoping that that's what it would do, is that I hope that there's parts of the book that people say, yes, actually, I knew that. So that's great. It's great.
But you weren't too sure about
it.
So and just having someone say, look, this is how people think. This is the way people do things.
Yeah, and certainly I guess that's what I've tried to do is the book for me is a reflection of my clinical experience over the years, because I've been fortunate enough to be in the industry for many years, but I also have an academic position as well. So I've been very careful to make sure that what I've said is there's an evidence base to support it, but it's certainly not an academic book. So there's some references in the back for those who want to do some more research and so forth. But this is really designed for people to just have a read, trust the evidence that's in there, and then maybe put a few steps in place to help them improve their own lives.
This is ABC North Queensland. My guest this morning is Dr. Jo Lukens, a psychologist with Peak Performance Psychology. She's just released her book called The Elite, and that's what we're going through this morning. One thing I like about the book is I like the way you tie in a lot of examples to sport. I mean, Usain Bolt, Michael Jordan, Kathy Freeman, Donald Braden. At the beginning of most of those chapters, you take one of these, champions in their field and break down a little bit, which sort of explains that chapter that you're talking about. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I think what I did was I deliberately went with well-known people, but maybe a part of their story that wasn't so well-known. And I think it's important to do that because we can relate to all of those people and all those champions. But what it also seeks to do is to seek out the human element of those people. So, for example, Michael Jordan is one, and it's actually dealing with the adversities that he faced as a young athlete when he was told he wasn't good enough. And how,
which is ridiculous when you think about it. How can someone tell Michael Jordan he's not good enough?
Yeah, and at the time he wasn't tall enough. He didn't meet the parameters that they were looking for. So it's the message for us all is it's not so much what happens to us in life, but what we do with it. And in that chapter, he's a great example of that. So I deliberately went with well-known people to illustrate some of those examples. And I think professionally for me, having had a background in psychology, it was very important to not talk about people that I had worked with because that would be inappropriate.
And I guess using these high-profile sporting people, they're people that everybody knows about. They've seen, little glimpses of their sporting career, but as you said, might not know too much. Behind that as well.
Knowing some of the backstory and knowing that often what we see with elite athletes is the glossy bit when they're out there competing, and hopefully what this book tries to share is that much of success is from the hard work that goes behind the scenes, and that's what all of us can work on, and all of us can improve little aspects of our lives. And I'm constantly rereading my own chapters to remind me of things that I can do. I think when you think of yourself as a work in progress, and you try to improve in little bits, whenever you can. I think that's part of the pathway to success.
One thing that I actually found quite interesting in the book is you write about the Bannister effect. Now, I have never heard of this before, and I read about it and I found it really quite interesting. Explain what the Bannister effect is.
Well, I guess what that's really tapping into is creativity and possibility. That what we know is that when you have a very fixed view of the world, it's very limiting. And at the time when he broke the 4-minute mile,
This is Roger Bannister.
This is Roger Bannister, who was a runner. And he set himself the goal of running the mile in under 4 minutes, which at the time was considered to be an impossible task. And in fact, there was some speculation at the time by some that, your heart would have to beat so quickly to do it that it would probably or possibly kill you. So it was really considered to be an unachievable event. The interesting thing with his story too is he had just come off the back of disappointment because he had just come fourth in a race where he was expected to do well. So again, another great example of an athlete coming back from adversity. Now, he trained in a way that was creative and set himself the possibilities and believed it would be possible to break that 4-minute mile. And so when he went out there that day, and if you look at his personal history, it's very different to what we would expect from a modern day elite athlete. A modern day elite athlete wouldn't normally do a full day of work, sharpen their spikes
No, not at all.
on the grinder at work, because he was a medical student at the time, wandered across the track. The conditions he was running in were not the ideal conditions.
Even probably the shoes, the clothing, everything.
All of that. And so then he went out to run that race. And one of the things that, as incredible as that feat was, and at that time, it was almost likened to conquering Everest, the other thing that flowed on from that was then the number of people in the subsequent years that then went on to break the 4-minute mile. It was considered an impossible feat. But he had that possibility thinking, what if someone can run that fast? And I think sometimes that's the lesson for us, is that sometimes we put barriers around ourselves about what we can and can't do. And if we entertain the possibility, well, what if I could write a book, for example? So a lot of people said to me along this journey, oh, wow, I can't believe you've done that. I could never do that. Well, I could never do that is setting you up for never doing it. And I can assure you that if I'd stuck with my old pathway, I wouldn't have written my book either. That I found a mentor, I found a process, and that's what got it done.
It's all about a frame of mind, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's been consistent. We've talked about that before, Alex, about sort of, when you have a fixed mindset versus the possibility that you could do something, and you open yourself up then to change and improving.
And not only with sport, that can be applied to any part of your life, really.
Absolutely.
Now, the book Elite, you're doing a launch this weekend. Is that right?
Yeah, so I've got a launch for those that supported the pre-sales of the book, and then I'm looking to do a public launch probably here in Townsville later in July. So hopefully I'll have that out on my website when that's all.
And if
the
anybody
details
is
firmed
interested
up.
in picking up a copy of the book, where can they find out more information?
Yeah, so they can actually access it at the moment through my website. Which if you know my name, you'll find my website. So Dr. Jo Lukens. So if you can find me through there, there's copies there available and they're distributed straight away.
And I'm sure if you just plug in Dr. Jo Lukens, Townsville, and the Elite, you'll be able to get to it straight away. You will definitely find
it, and it's on through all the usual digital sellers that you can purchase through. And then I'm in conversation with a local bookstore as well about stocking some locally here in Townsville.
And are you hoping maybe it could be used as a resource in schools as well?
There certainly would be that possibility, and I've actually already had 2 schools that have purchased copies for their school libraries. So that's really nice to see. And I guess what it lends itself to is, on any of these topics, there's opportunities then to talk to students, to talk to workplaces about some of these concepts, because, the idea of performing at your best is applicable in schools, in workplaces, in our homes, and obviously on the sporting scene as well.
And this has definitely got the sporting stamp of approval by one incredibly elite North Queensland sportsman. I did mention that Jonathan Thurston referred to you as better than Lego, but he's also written the foreword to your book as well.
Yeah, I was very grateful for that. So Jonathan has been very supportive of the work that I've done, so I was very grateful for the foreword that he wrote, and I'm very appreciative that's in there.
Dr. Jo Lukens is a psychologist with Peak Performance Psychology. Her book is called The Elite. If you'd like to find out any more, you can just plug in Dr. Jo Lukens, The Elite, into your search engine. You'll be able to find out more. Or you can always give us a call here at the station. We'll let you know. That's 1300 630 222. Dr. Lukens, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, Alex.